Language learning seems straightforward: study vocabulary, practice grammar, and you're set, right? But research shows 78% of English learners hit a plateau because they're approaching it completely backwards.
That's such a fascinating statistic, and it really highlights why we need to rethink how people learn English. What do you think is behind that plateau effect?
Well, here's what's really interesting. Studies show that learners who engage in active speaking from day one progress 3.5 times faster than those who focus solely on reading and writing. It's like trying to learn swimming by only reading about it.
That swimming analogy really puts it in perspective. You can't learn to swim without getting wet.
Exactly, and you know what's remarkable? The human brain processes spoken language 40% faster than written language. So when we speak, we're actually engaging multiple neural pathways simultaneously.
That's fascinating. So how does this translate into practical learning strategies?
Well, let's try a quick exercise. Think about how you'd explain your job to someone in English. Take a moment.
Oh, I see what you did there, making us actively engage with the language, rather than just discussing it theoretically.
Right, and neuroscience shows that this kind of active recall strengthens neural pathways 300% more effectively than passive listening. You know what's really interesting? The rise of language learning apps has increased successful English acquisition by 64% since 2015.
Speaking of technology, I've been looking at some research about podcast learning. Did you know that learners who combine podcast listening with active speaking improve their fluency twice as fast?
That's actually a perfect segue into another exercise. Let's have our listeners practice describing their morning routine in English. Take a moment.
You know what really stands out to me? The psychological aspect of language learning. The fear of making mistakes can increase cortisol levels by up to 37%.
Exactly. And here's something mind-blowing. Studies show that learners who embrace making mistakes actually advance 2.5 times faster than perfectionists. It's like the brain needs those errors to build stronger neural connections.
Well, that certainly puts a new spin on the whole practice makes perfect concept.
And speaking of practice, immersion in an English-speaking country accelerates learning by 400% compared to traditional classroom settings. And here's the key. Virtual immersion through social media and online content can achieve up to 70% of those same benefits.
Those numbers really challenge the assumption that you have to travel abroad to become fluent.
So here's something crucial. Research indicates that learners who focus on relevant, personally interesting content retain vocabulary 85% more effectively than those following generic textbook materials.
That reminds me of the cognitive load theory. Our brains can process new information much more efficiently when it's connected to something we care about.
Exactly. And get this, studies show that positive self-talk during language learning can increase retention rates by up to 60%. It's not just about what you learn, but how you approach the learning process.
Those are some powerful insights to wrap up with. What would you say are the key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, the data clearly shows 3 main points. Speak early and often, embrace mistakes as learning opportunities, and focus on personally relevant content. Remember, 92% of successful language learners credit their progress to consistent practice rather than natural talent.
That's such an encouraging note to end on. It's not about innate ability, but dedicated effort.
Thanks for joining us on Gen FM. Keep pushing those language boundaries, and remember, every conversation is a step toward fluency. Until next time.